Mike, 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 Mike. Guess what day it is? Hump day. Hi, you guys. Good morning. Good morning. I hope everybody had a great night. Yesterday was a day. Whew. The girl was on for 9.5 hours. That is a lot of Genlu. That might be too much Genlu. Oh, for those of you who hung in there with me through the whole 9.5 hours or in and out for the night, thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate it very, very much. For those of you who decided, hey, I'm going to watch on the replay, thank you very much. I appreciate it very, very much. Your support means the world to me. And in the spirit of support, let's hear a word from our sponsor, shall we? Let me find it. Here we go.
And Kai, when you're on Jen Lou's channel, what do you do with the like button?
Smash, smash, smash! Yeah.
Yeah. Smash that like button, y'all. Smash that down button if you want to. I literally, every single live that I do, I always have one like, one dislike. Always. There's always one. Which I don't know who that one person is, if it's the same person, if it's a different person each time, but it does make me laugh each time I see it. It does make me laugh every single time. All right. So let's talk about what happened yesterday. All right. And wow, that was some testimony, wasn't it? So last night, as if I hadn't had enough Sarah Boone, I decided, you know what? The lawyer you know is live. And I'm curious. I want to see what his reaction is to her testimony and the direct examination, the lawyer's performance. Mr. Owens did direct, and Mr. J handled the cross. And I have to say that the lawyer you know, Peter, if I may, he said a lot of the same things that we all said. Like, he did feel like there were times during the cross exam that Mr. J could have gone in a little harder. As particularly this one part in her direct testimony. So in her direct testimony, one of the things that Sarah agreed to, it wasn't actually it wasn't really a question, honestly. It was more like a statement from James Owens with a question at the end, with an inflection that sounded like a question at the end. Thank you so much, Teacup Kraken. Thank you for gifting a membership. If you got that membership from Teacup Kraken, please be sure and thank her because that was very generous. It was at the point where Sarah Boone basically admitted that she wanted George. She knew he was uncomfortable in that suitcase, and she wanted him to be uncomfortable. Now, for me personally, overall, what I felt about her testimony respective to the suitcase and the 11 minutes. So there was a still photo. Then 9 minutes and some odd seconds later was the first video. Then there was 11 minutes and then the second video. Okay, that is the order of the events as they took place, which to me, the testimony surrounding that time period is what, if I were on the jury, what I would focus on. What was happening in that moment. To me, overall, what I felt from Sarah was she kept George in that suitcase, not because she was in fear, because it was punitive. She wanted to punish him. That is what I took away from that testimony. Okay. That's just my opinion. It was punitive. She felt that George had made her suffer, and she wanted to make him suffer as well. and it was punitive. It was not done out of fear. I do think that she probably is telling the truth about the bat as far as using the bat. How she used the bat, I disagree with. I don't think she was poking him. I think she was hitting the bat. I don't agree that the witnesses, the neighbors, are getting the days mixed up. And here's why. So Sarah claims that Brandon and Vinny have the wrong day when they claim they heard the loud bang down the stairs. Okay. And she says it actually occurred the day before. Okay. Here's why I don't believe that. Sarah also claimed that there was a large chunk missing of hair missing from her head because George had snatched her by her hair and drug her down the stairs. Okay. It would be my opinion that there would be injuries that would be visible. When you're missing hair from your head, when somebody rips the hair out by the root, we're not talking about one hair. Everybody can, lots of people pull a single hair out by the root, either accidentally or intentionally. Like some people, I don't do this because I believe in the old wives' tale that when you pluck a gray hair, that 7 will grow back. And who needs that kind of negativity in your life? But I do have I'm not gray. I have some random, they're white, which is interesting to me because my hair's so dark, but they're white. Anyway, lots of people do that. One hair on your head is not going to leave, a significant, you're not going to notice that. But if somebody rips a chunk of hair out of your head while they're dragging you, there's going to be noticeable. That's going to leave a mark. Okay. First of all, there's going to be a patch missing from your head. Think NK. Remember that debacle? That's why I say, you need a safety word, NK. Because she walked into that police station with a chunk missing out of her hair and it was visible. Okay. Also, you got dragged downstairs. That's going to leave a mark as well because you're resisting against the dragging. You're also being dragged. There's friction. You're going to have marks. She was photographed. There were no marks. Period. End of story. Okay. I think now I have had that same bruise on that part of your hand. If you turn your hand upside down, you're looking at the palm where you see the palm and your thumb meet, that meaty part right there. That I've had a bruise there. Do you know what caused that bruise? Me slamming my hand down. So there's one really quick thing that I want to correct before I forget that I said yesterday. Sarah, I said that the first question out of Sarah's mouth after the interrogation was over was not about her phone. I was incorrect. And I'm not even going to make excuses. Okay. I was just wrong. The end. The first question out of Sarah's mouth was, when am I going to get my cell phone back today? Now, okay. I would say my argument is this. If you had a conversation with Detective Koepsell and your understanding was that you were coming down there to get your phone and they ushered you into an interrogation room where they promptly began to interrogate you, I don't think I would have phrased the question like that. I think I would have said, so how come you said I could get my phone and I can't have my phone? Or I feel like there would have been a rebuttal from Sarah because Sarah loves nothing more than a rebuttal. We watched her interrogation, right? So she says, am I getting my phone back today? Scott Lowen says no. Why doesn't she say, then why did you tell me I was getting my phone back? I feel like if they had lured her down there on that false pretense, like she claims, I feel like Sarah would have responded and pointed that out. That's just my feeling. I'm not in Sarah's brain. I don't want to be in Sarah's brain. I don't know that there's just something about that whole story that doesn't ring true. That's it. That's all. Also, one of the things that I learned yesterday watching The Lawyer You Know, which you guys were pointing out in the chat, and I wasn't understanding in that moment, I understand now. I understand why you guys were asking about a narrative and what that means legally. So basically, the way that I understand it is this: when an attorney elicits a narrative from a witness, it is a basically CYA, cover your bum, because they're not asking questions and it's covering them from essentially lying to the court. That's the way that that's the way I understood it. Hopefully I understood that correctly. I also think this is huge too. Sunday Doodles Copy Paper Press Pass points out she went to the shower to hide is a lie, in my opinion. Jen Liu. I don't think she hid in the shower either. I don't. And we won't know this for a fact, although I don't think that Mr. J would ever misrepresent what Sarah said to the court, ever. But we won't be able to confirm this until is it Sarah's witness? Is it Dr. Horton? Or is it the state's witness, Dr. Werner? We won't know until the forensic psychologists testify about this whole I lost control of the suitcase. I personally believe that that is a leak. I believe that she's telling the truth about losing control. I think she's telling the truth because I think that she lost control when the suitcase was at the top of the stairs. I think she perched that suitcase on the top of the stairs, just a little over the top stair. And I think she was trying to scare George. I do, because she was angry and this was a punitive thing. And I think she did shake it around and act like she was going to push it down the stairs in an effort to scare him. And I think she's telling the truth, and she did lose control. And I think George absolutely went tumbling down those stairs inside of that suitcase. I think that the neighbors are telling the truth. I think that these are not neighbors that wanted to be involved, number one. Number two, they don't have a reason to not tell the truth. I don't think they have a reason to remember what day it was, particularly because, again, there's no evidence of the claim that Sarah made of the events that took place the day before happening. Now, something happened the day before, apparently, allegedly, according to Sarah, because there was a phone call between George and his brother, Juan, who Juan testified to, and Sarah is in the background telling George, tell your brother how you choked me. Choked me, not snatched me up and dragged me around by my hair. Choked me, if I'm remembering the testimony correctly. Is it possible that he also grabbed her while he was choking her? He grabbed her hair? Yes, but I don't think that she went down the stairs. That's the part I don't believe. That's the part I don't believe. Just that part. I mean, there's a lot of other parts, but with respect to, I do think George went down those stairs. I do think she hit him with the bat, but I think that it went a little bit differently. We will never know because of the way that the photograph of the suitcase is and the way that the videos of the suitcase are taken, we will never know where that zipper was in relation to, like, how much space she left. Because I am wondering if she used that bat to hit his hand and telling the truth as he's potentially, struggling um, against the zipper. I do wonder if Sarah actually zipped that zipper up more. Like, maybe it started out as a joke, but I listened to some testimony last night, and one of the things that she said was that the first thing she said about the
Good
suitcase.
morning, everyone.
Hang on.
Madam Clerk's going to go ahead and call the case to order.
Just one second. This won't take very long. She kept saying that after she zipped the zipper and George was in the suitcase, she was joking about how small he was and that he could fit in the suitcase. I'm going to leave it there and we're going to pick up at the break and I'll finish.
Case number 2020 CF 2603, State of Florida, Sarah Boone, charges and updates for the record of the state.
David Ketchner on behalf of the state. William J. for the state.
Defense,
James Owens for Ms. Boone.
Tony Henderson for Sarah Boone.
Kevin Becker, we have service.
Ms. Boone, raise your right hand, please sworn. Please be swear or affirm the testimony you give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do.
Good morning. Can you state your full name and date of birth for the record for me?
Sarah Boone, 10-10-7-7.
Ms. Boone is seated at counsel's table wearing a dark gray suit jacket and a maroon blouse. She is in custody. However, she's not in any restraints, so we will be continuing to stand as our jury enters and exits. State, are there any housekeeping matters we need to address this morning before we bring in our panel? Defense.
Judge, I don't know if you got the email last night of the potential witnesses we're going to call.
In addition to the one I received this morning. Yes, sir.
Dr. Harper did get in last night after midnight. She's over at Koepsell, but in addition, we may recall the phone extraction expert. She's not on the list.
Okay, understood. All right. Are we ready to bring in our panel?
Yes.
Okay. All right, very good. Let's go ahead and stand and bring in our panel.
All right. So while they bring in the panel and we're waiting, where I left off with Sarah said that she was joking with George about how he actually could fit in the suitcase. She was saying how small he was. I don't think it was a joke. I think, this is just my personal opinion, there's no way for me to prove this, but the overall tone from the first suitcase video was mocking. And I actually think that it's quite possible that Sarah was actually taunting George and making fun of George for the fact that he could actually fit inside of that suitcase, as it were. That is what I think. That's just my opinion. Obviously, I can't prove that. They're talking about, Caleb asks the what extraction expert. So the testimony from the phone extraction technician from FDLE. So that's who they're talking about. They're going to recall the person who performed the extraction of Sarah's phone. I don't think that this was a joke to George. I really don't. I don't know how she got that man in that suitcase. I don't think it happened the way she says, but I can't, these are a lot of things. There's a lot of things you can't really prove, which is problematic. But the fact that Sarah cannot remember taking either one of those videos or that picture, yet has total recall of what happened in between both of those videos, we need to have some type of somebody, I don't know who handles this sort of thing, but maybe a forensic psychologist, but somebody who handles memory and the impacts of alcohol on memory and how that works. because if you can't remember what you did the night before, that's usually, you know, your level of intoxication, regardless of how frequently or infrequently you drink alcohol. It is what it is blackout drunk, right? So if that were the case and you can't remember, I would think that you wouldn't have total recall of the interim. I would think it would come to you back to you in flashes. That's just my opinion. But we need to have somebody to talk about that.
A great evening. If you could, again, just by a show of hands, you complied with the court's instructions for the overnight break. Record reflect all hands have been raised. Members of the jury, at this point in time, the defense is going to continue with their evidence and testimony presentation. And I'm going to ask them to call their first witness at this time. Mr. Owens, you may proceed, sir.
At this time, the defense calls Deputy Ramirez Delgado.
Please swear or affirm that the testimony you should give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I swear.
Good morning. You can be seated. And can you please state and spell your name for the record for me?
Yes, sir. My name is Jessica, first name Jessica, Jessica. First last name is Ramirez, Ramirez. Second last name is Delgado, Delgado.
Thank you, ma'am. You may inquire, sir.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, sir.
Ma'am, how are you employed?
I am a reserve deputy with the Orange County Sheriff's Office.
And how long have you been employed with the sheriff's?
7 years.
Back on July the 25th of 2018, how were you employed at that time?
I was a full-time deputy sheriff for the agency.
On that date, ma'am, did you have the occasion due to your duties to report or to go to 4748 Franks Lane, apartment number 3?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall what you were going there for? The purpose?
Yes, sir. I was a backup deputy for a call involving a male kicking a female in the face. So it came out as a domestic call.
Okay. And was it another officer who also responded?
Yes, sir. He was the primary.
Okay. Ma'am, while you were there, did you have contact with Sarah Boone?
Yes, sir.
While having contact with Miss Boone, were you able to observe any injuries?
Yes, sir.
to the person?
Yes, sir. She had swelling and bruising in her right eye.
And ma'am, were you able to make contact with Mr. Jorge Torres?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to notice any injuries on his person?
Yes, sir. He had red markings and some abrasions around his neck.
Ma'am, at a certain point in time, did you place Miss Boone under arrest?
Yes, sir. I detained her and placed her in my vehicle.
Ma'am, at that time, do you recall or remember Miss Boone asking you, "Why am I in trouble?"
Yes, sir.
And without saying what you said, but did you respond to her?
Yes, sir.
After that, ma'am, do you remember Miss Boone asking you why? Because I fucking fought back.
Yes, sir.
I can have one more.
Yes, sir.
No further questions.
Thank you. Any cross-examination?
During the course of your investigation, you or the other responding deputies spoke to Mr. Torres as well.
Yes, sir.
After concluding all of your investigation, which involved talking to both Mr. Torres and to Ms. Boone and making your observations of the two of them, did you all make final decisions about how to handle your investigation?
The other deputy, which at the time was Deputy Zito, was the one that made that determination.
Okay, but that was collectively what you all looked at was statements from Ms. Boone and Mr. Torres, correct?
Yes, sir.
And your physical observations of both persons.
Yes.
and then whatever else you may have observed on scene?
Yes, sir.
And do you take into account people's demeanor when they are giving you statements, when assessing their credibility?
Yes, sir.
No other questions?
Any redirect examination?
No, Your Honor.
Can this witness be released?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So basically the reason they would bring her up is because now we're going to start hearing prior bad acts and character testimony.
Defense, call your next witness.
At this time, the defense calls Deputy John Alden.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you should give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Sir, good morning. Can you state and spell your name for the record?
John Alden, John Alden.
All right, thank you, sir. You may be seated. Mr. Henderson, you may inquire.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Sir, how are you employed? How are you employed?
I'm employed with the Orange County Sheriff's Office as a corporal.
Back on August the 28th of 2019, how were you employed?
I was a deputy in Uniform Patrol Division in Sector 2.
As a part of your job duties that day, did you have the occasion to respond to 4748 France Lane, number 3?
Yes.
What was the purpose?
There ended up being a battery call.
And sir, were you the lead officer on this case?
Yes,
Were there any other backup officers there with you?
I believe so.
Sir, on that date, August the 28th of 2019, did you come in contact with Sarah Boone?
Yes,
Sir, on that date, did you observe any injuries on Sarah Boone?
I observed redness on the left side of her neck and what to be an old injury to her right eye.
Sir, on August 28th of 2019, did you come in contact with Jorge Torres?
Yes,
And did you notice any injuries on Mr. Torres?
yes, he had some redness on it by his left eye.
Sir, on that day, was Mr. Torres placed under arrest?
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, so Cordelia asks, do y'all think she will get away with this? I'm worried the jury will believe her because Casey Anthony got away with it. Okay. I understand the concern, right? We always worry about that, but I understand more about what the jury, the situation with the jury in the Casey Anthony trial now than I did back then. Okay. The issue with the Casey Anthony jury, according to the judge who presided over the case, was that there was not a special instruction in the jury instructions that told the jury that the state does not have to prove cause of death. They only had to prove manner of death. And so it was really, her acquittal was due to, unfortunately, poor jury instructions. I don't think the state of Florida in any jurisdiction will ever make that mistake again. That's number one. I do think that the jury was likely, some of them at least, impacted by those photographs. They were, particularly of Sarah's black eye. That one was the worst. I do think it impacted them. I do. I do think they may have softened towards her and even felt bad for her. I do not think that she is going to be acquitted of these charges. No. Well, they've interviewed the jurors, okay? And the jurors all have pretty much said that the reason they acquitted Casey Anthony is because the state didn't prove how Kaylee died. And so, and they didn't understand in the jury instructions that the state didn't have to prove that. They only had to prove that the manner of death was homicide, that it was not an accident, that it was, okay? That will never, that's never going to happen again. I mean, not never, ever, but Florida is never going to like make sure that in a case where skeletal remains have been found, that there's not a special jury instruction. Okay, let's keep going.
Any cross-examination?
Yes. Is it fair to say that Mr. Torres had quite a few marks on him?
From my report, I remember marking the redness by his left eye.
And did you have your body worn camera activated when you responded to this call?
I believe so.
And so that would be the best evidence of both video and audio as to what occurred while you were on scene.
It would, especially since this happened 4 years or 5 years ago now.
Here we go.
And did Mr. Torres refuse to say what happened that day?
He did.
Based on the conclusion of your investigation, which involved talking to Boone and attempting to talk to Mr. Torres, as well as your visual observations of both them and the scene, is that how you all reach your conclusions?
Yes.
No other questions?
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Can this witness be released?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Jay?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I think the jury can feel bad for her and sympathy for her, because I do think that, let's be honest, there is evidence of abuse on by both parties perpetrated on the other party, right? I think that the jury, like us, can feel badly for the abuse that both of them suffered at the hands of one another, but also find her guilty of second-degree murder. Both things can be true, because they can feel sorry for her, but they have to base their verdict solely on the evidence presented. And at this point, Sarah's own testimony really I don't think they're going to be able to find that she was that a reasonable person would find after George Torres was in the dadgum suitcase that he continued to be a threat, and what she did keeping him in the suitcase was justifiable. And then the ending result, while it was not her intention maybe to kill him, right? But containing him, I just don't think they're going to find it justifiable. A justifiable use of self-defense, I should say. Have they called somebody? Did I miss something? What's happening here?
Yes, may we approach you, ma'am?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. We have been in court. We've had 2 witnesses and we're already approaching. Is there a charcuterie tray up there I'm not aware of? It's a little early for a charcuterie tray. Is there a fruit platter up there? Does somebody stop at the Publix and get a fruit platter? By the way, if you ever have an occasion to be at a Publix, I highly, highly recommend their fruit bowls. I've said this a million times. Their fruit bowls are delicious. Doesn't matter what flavor, what fruit you get. If you get a combination of fruits, a single fruit, delicious. Teacup cracking.
Judge, at
Charcuterie.
this time, the defense calls Deputy Koepsell.
Who?
Or detective, excuse me.
Is there a charcuterie tray, a fruit platter, maybe a little crudité? Good morning, Kimberly. Good morning, Music City Mom. Good morning, everybody. Yes, Violet. There, Publix. And their pub subs are good. Although I have to say, a lot of kerfuffle is made about the chicken tender pub sub. And that's not my favorite. Drunker than charcuterie brown. Ooh, the suitcase friends. Publix. I
Morning
love
again. Could you
Publix.
state your full name and date of birth for the record? Or, I'm sorry, full name and spell it for us.
Publix chicken is good, but not
It's Chelsea
their
Koepsell.
pub subs. The
Chelsey.
chicken tender pub subs. I just didn't like it.
Psell.
All right, thank you. Counselor, you may inquire.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
In relation to this case, on February the 26th of 2020, did you have the occasion to interview Abraham Marino?
Yes,
Who- Oh,
Was
did
that
I
interview
call
recorded,
somebody
ma'am?
Kim and their name is
Yes, it
Kimberly?
was.
Did I do that?
Remember, as
If I
part
did,
of
I'm
that
sorry.
interview, that Mr. Marino tell you that he had had contact with Sarah Boone on February the 24th of 2020.
Are you asking the night of the incident when police were called out?
Yes, the next morning,
The day that we were called.
that you were called out.
Okay.
The 24th.
So yes, he did have contact with her, but it wasn't in the morning. It was while we were there.
While you were there.
Yes.
What time did you get there? That's probably what's going
I got there around 14:20 hours, which would be 2:20 in the afternoon.
on. So the afternoon on the 24th.
No, it was later. I recall, I believe I was doing paperwork in my vehicle. So it would have been at some point during the investigation, but it wasn't, I didn't notice him until, I'm not sure if I noticed him until before or after Sarah was interviewed.
All right, but to his interview part, the interview, did he tell you in the interview that he had had contact with Miss Boone on that day?
Yes, he did.
Did he tell you at that time that Miss Boone had made a statement to him?
Yes, he did.
Do you remember what that statement was?
I don't wish to quote what he stated. So I don't know the exact verbiage, but he basically replayed what, I'm not sure if he replayed what exactly occurred that day, but I do know he mentioned something about, she mentioned being dragged down the stairs a couple days prior.
Did he say to you during that interview that Sarah Boone told us that a couple of days ago they had gotten into a fight where he grabbed her by her hair and dragged her down the steps?
I would assume that he's reading my report, and that does sound similar to what my report should say.
Hang on a minute. Okay. Well, I guess the, sorry, you guys. Okay. So a couple days prior, okay, they were out and interviewed him on Monday. A couple of days prior to Monday would be Saturday, right? Is that what I'm getting at? Is that what I'm thinking here? Right, yeah. Because Sunday it happened. Sunday he went in the suitcase. Saturday would have been the night that he got. So this is where they're trying to prove that Sarah was drugged down the stairs on Saturday and not Sunday. Okay. Thus, the two neighbors' statements, they're recalling the incorrect day. All right, here we go.
So this statement was
Thank you.
given on the 27th of February. I'm sorry, the 26th of February. Would you
Yes.
agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Okay. The contact and the statement that Ms. Boone made to Mr. Moreno was on the 24th of February. Is that correct?
Repeat the question. I'm sorry.
When Mr. Moreno is saying that Ms. Boone came up to him and made this statement that we just talked about,
Yes,
that was on February the 24th. Is that correct?
that is correct.
So when she said a couple of days ago, that would have brought it back to February the 22nd. Is that correct?
Potentially, yes.
Ma'am, during that interview with you, did Mr. Moreno ever indicate to you that when he had contact with Ms. Boone on the 24th, that Sarah Boone told him what happened was an accident? Did he say that Sarah Boone stated that she was teaching him a lesson and things got out of hand and that she fell asleep?
I don't recall the entirety of that being accurate. Yeah, I don't recall the entirety of what he just said being accurate.
Do you remember him saying that at all?
He did say that she had, I believe he said on the recording, passed out. So that's why, like, part of the statements might be accurate, but
Ma'am, would it refresh your memory if you were to see the recorded statement?
his recorded statement,
Yes.
transcription?
Yes.
Sure, yeah.
If there's a recorded
Close to
statement,
it.
why
Yeah.
don't we just freaking play the recorded statement? Why are we looking at transcripts? Let the jury hear what he said. This is ridiculous.
Okay.
If you can
I don't
prove,
recall all the statements.
hold on
that
a
you
minute.
asked.
Let me just stop right here. I'm about to rage. Defense. Play the statement. You're trying to impeach Kelsey. Who are you trying to impeach? Are you trying to impeach Mr. Moreno or are you trying to impeach Chelsea Koepsell? I'm confused. If you're trying to impeach Mr. Moreno and you have the statement, play the statement. This is freaking poppycock.
The way you asked it, but
Would it help if I repeat it?
sure, yeah.
Okay.
You asked, like, you said multiple statements, so
Yes, ma'am.
this was a 11-minute interview.
I'll be
Right.
back. This is driving me
Uh,
nuts already.
The statement would be that Sarah Boone stated to Mr. Moreno that she was teaching him a lesson and things got out of hand and that she fell asleep. And I'm wanting to know.
Did you say, okay, I thought I heard you say passed out the first time. I'm not sure if you said passed out or fell asleep.
Fell asleep.
Fell asleep, okay.
And what I'm asking is there any indication that he told you that statement on the date of that interview on the 26th?
Sorry, I'm trying to go to the part where we talked about that.
Yes, ma'am. Take your time.
Okay, so like I had stated, there were certain things that I thought was accurate from your statement. He stated, do I just read exactly what it says? Do you need like the number next to it or anything?
Yes, I have no problem with you reading what he said.
Okay, then she,
Approach. Ma'am, you cannot read the statement at this time.
okay.
Thank you. You may continue, Mr. Henderson.
He described,
Hang on.
No.
Just wait for a
Oh,
question,
so
okay?
sorry.
It's okay.
yes, sorry.
Ma'am, anywhere in that interview, do you see reference to this statement that Sarah stated that she was teaching him a lesson and things got out of hand and that she fell asleep?
No to the first two parts of your question. I heard passed out the first time you asked me this question, and that's why I said that part of it was accurate, because he did say that she passed out in his statement. That was what Sarah told him.
Okay, did she say she was teaching him a lesson? Is that in there?
No,
And things got out of hand. Is that in there?
no, I don't recall that.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
And again, ma'am, this interview was on February the 26th of 2020. Is that correct?
Yes, it was.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Any cross-examination?
No other questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Can this witness be released?
Yes, Your Honor.
State?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Defense? Call the next witness.
I believe Dr. Brandon is here. Madam Judge.
All right.
Making sure.
Okay, so Sarah didn't use the terms apparently, or he didn't use the term that she told him she was teaching him a lesson and it got out of control. Okay, well, that sort of makes sense because according to Sarah, she wasn't teaching him a lesson. This was a non-lesson in a way to be a better person.
Judge, may we approach?
Yes, sir.
Here we go. Why are we approaching? I don't get it. I don't get the approach. Why are we approaching? It's too early to be approaching. What are you writing, Sarah? Oh, are you getting help with the crossword puzzle? What's happening here? Did you fill out your Sudoku incorrectly? And now you need a pencil rather than a pen? Lord. I think that's who he said yes, Dr. Brandon. I think he means Dr. Brannon, but I don't see why she wouldn't be able to talk, Virgo, because she's been released from her subpoena. I mean, I can ask her about how she felt about her testimony. She should be allowed to interview about that. No, they haven't talked about the passing of the notes or the fact that Sarah was conferring with her defense team while the lawyers were up at the judge's bench discussing witness exhibits. Okay, good morning. It's a complaint form for stale Pop-Tarts. She's writing to Kelloo double good Kellogg's best to you. I don't know that it's going to be perjury for Mr. Moreno because he said this is what he recalls telling the police. And if they had Chelsea Koepsell's report, then why didn't the defense say, well, would looking at the report help refresh your memory or play his statement, something, you know? So I don't know that it's going to be perjury. She's writing us a letter to circle yes or no if we want to be her friend. No, we don't, Sarah. The friendship door is closed.
I do. Doctor, good morning. Could you state and spell your name for the record for us?
Michael Brannon, Brannon.
Thank you. Counselor, you may inquire.
Dr. Brannon, good morning.
Good morning.
Spry having just traveled from Miami to Orlando.
Yes.
Is that not correct? Okay.
It was a good drive.
Would you please describe for the jury your background, training, and experience, both in forensic psychology as well as battered women syndrome?
Sure. So I'm a psychologist licensed in the state of Florida. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. That's from a university called Nova University. I also have a master's degree in psychology. I received that in 1980, also in psychology. And I received my doctoral degree in psychology after a year internship where I worked with severely mentally ill individuals in Hialeah, Florida. In 1988, I finished my degree requirements for my doctorate in psychology. And in 1990, I was licensed as a psychologist. I've been operating as a psychologist since then, since 1990. Originally, I started off doing the work that most people kind of think about when they think about psychologists, doing therapy, counseling with people, helping them through with their problems, things like that. In 1994, I began on a career almost quite accidentally as a forensic psychologist when I testified in my first case in front of a jury. And from that time on, I've been doing mostly forensic psychology. My practice very quickly changed from that time on. I'm currently the co-director of the Institute for Behavioral Sciences and the Law, and anywhere between 80 and 90% of all my work now is related to some legal or court-related matter in the ways in which mental health interfaces or impacts or helps to give opinions about various legal issues. I've taught rather extensively in the area of forensic psychology. I teach to mostly legal audiences, but oftentimes too, I speak to groups of psychology students wanting to sit up here and do what I'm doing as well. I make long drives and then come up here and talk to people about cases. I also currently on the staff, the adjunct faculty staff for the School of Psychiatry at Florida Atlantic University. I help to train their forensic psychiatrists, so not just psychologists, but psychiatrists in terms of doing this work as a psychologist or as a psychiatrist, a mental health professional who gives opinions in the courtroom.
Do you like pina coladas and getting caught in the rain? I don't know why that song is in my brain, but as he's listing all the things that I'm reading the chat and he's listing his CV and you guys are making me laugh and that's what I want to ask him.
And are you also required to update your educational background and knowledge as a forensic psychologist?
Yes, sir. So sure. So every 2 years, we're required to get 40 continuing education credits to maintain our license. And part of that is we have to, on a regular basis, update our work in domestic violence or battered women syndrome. So we have to take those courses. We're all required, whether you're a forensic psychologist or not, to take that coursework. So as part of our requirements, we also have to take separate coursework in regards to domestic violence is a general term, or intimate partner violence. But along with that comes discussion as well with battered spouse, or what's oftentimes called battered person syndrome now.
And I apologize. I'm kind of bouncing around here, doctor. I apologize again. For the uninitiated, just exactly.
Just a second. Okay, so the way that I understand this is that Dr. Brandon is going to only testify to battered spouse syndrome, what it is, that kind of thing. He is not going to testify to Sarah having battered spouse syndrome. Okay? Because I do not think he evaluated her. If I am remembering the hearings, pretrial hearings correctly. All right, let's continue.
What do you mean by forensic psychology?
So forensic psychology is a division of psychology. Most people don't think about that as often when they think about psychologists. But forensic psychologists are individuals who have degrees in psychology who are working to help to answer questions that come up in the legal system. It could be in criminal cases like we're here for today, answering various criminal questions, giving opinions about those questions. Or it could be in other settings like family settings, divorce proceedings, or sometimes civil settings like personal injury. Someone's claiming some emotional damage or something has happened to them. So forensic psychology is really the way that we use the science of psychology to help give opinions about various legal matters.
Good morning, Muffins Mimi. Good morning, everybody who's just joining us.
DSM?
Good to see you.
So the DSM it stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's kind of our code book, if you will, to help us to know what the different symptoms are for different mental health disorders, whether it's major depression or schizophrenia or anxiety. So it gives us a code book of here's the criteria you have to meet in order to have that diagnosis. And then we're able to utilize that in terms of either treatment, so even insurance billing, but being able to inform patients too about what condition we think that they're suffering from. It's been updated many times over the years. It started at just DSM, and now it's at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5th edition, text revised. So we've gone through a lot of revisions over the years to try to fine tune in an empirical or scientific way what the elements are, if you will, of various mental health conditions.
Now, you've been asked to testify today in regards to battered women's syndrome. Is the battered women's syndrome identified or located within the DSM-5?
So it is not. It is not a diagnostic category in the DSM-5 or other coding books as well. There's others besides the DSM. That's just the most popular one. But it's not a formal diagnosis that it is contained within that book, that classification manual that I just told you about.
Within your field of forensic psychology, however, is there a subcategory that is located within the DSM-5 that experts would recognize as a DSM diagnosis?
Yes, sir.
And what is that, sir?
So that category would be in the trauma section of the DSM-5 TR. There's a whole category on trauma disorders, and it's most closely related to something that we call post-traumatic stress disorder. That isn't the only trauma disorder, but that's the one that what used to be called battered women's syndrome. Now I refer to it as battered person syndrome, but all of it really is more connected to a trauma disorder like post-traumatic stress disorder.
Now, testify that you testify on criminal matters. Do you also testify? You indicated also on personal injury cases and emotional. That would be civil, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You know, MK, I'm leaning that way as well.
You've testified as an expert, as a forensic psychologist. Have you testified for, and today you're testifying for the defense or were called by the defense?
Okay, so Cordelia asks, who is Dr. Brandon? Dr. Brandon is the defense's expert witness, one of them. He did not evaluate Sarah Boone, to my understanding. What he is there simply to do is to testify about what battered person, battered spouse syndrome is. That's how I understand it. He did not evaluate Sarah Boone.
Do you also testify for the state of Florida or other states within this country?
Yes to both of those. I've testified in other states. I also testify for both the prosecution, the state or government, depending if it's federal or if it's a state case, and also for the defense. So I really get appointments and hired by both sides.
About how many times have you testified?
Wow. At last count, it was about 1,500 times. It's over that, way over that now. That was from a few years ago. I testify in a lot of different kinds of hearings and trials over the course of, mostly in Florida, but in other states as well.
Now, you're familiar with the fact that there is a special jury instruction that's been recognized by the Florida Supreme Court.
Approach.
I don't believe he can testify to that. I believe that it is not an expert witness's duty to be discussing jury instructions. I don't think they're going to let that in. I think they're going to have to definitely rephrase that question. Uh-oh, they left a stapler within Sarah's reach. If that suit doesn't fit, you know, she's going to use the staplers to hem it and tailor it. You know, I'm interested in what the forensic psychiatrist who actually evaluated Sarah, has to say about Sarah.
The objection is sustained.
And also the state's expert witness who also evaluated Sarah, because I suspect the state's witness is going to go. Hold on a minute.
Testified as to Battered.
I think the state's expert witness is going to potentially, maybe, if there are any, other mental health issues, personality disorders, etc. I'm curious if she will be discussing that. Apparently, and I don't know why I called her Dr. Horton because that's not her name, Dr. Harper might potentially testify today.
Women's syndrome, battered person syndrome. Are there other synonyms or similar names for what you're describing, in particular battered spouse syndrome?
Well, we talk about it in terms of trauma disorders like post-traumatic stress disorder, but the way when it's applied to the legal system, it's called battered wife, or that was the original terminology for it, battered wife syndrome or battered person syndrome. So really depends on your setting. So in this setting, we oftentimes talk about this particular condition that I've been asked to talk about today, is really referred to as battered spouse syndrome.
And have you been asked to give your opinion as a legal expert and on battered spouse syndrome?
Yes, sir.
How frequently have you been asked to do that?
I've been involved in about 100 cases of just that alone. I've been involved in some sort of testimony about 50 times.
And you indicated that you testified for the state, you testified for the defense, you testified in state cases, federal cases. Could you break down on a percentage basis the number of times you testified for the state versus testifying for the defense?
It's really close in terms of the last time we looked at it, it was about 50-50. On most cases, like for instance, if there's a case that involves battered spouse, potentially battered spouse or battered wife syndrome, I'm usually called by the defense first because they raise the issue. If you're called by the prosecution, whether it be federal or state, what oftentimes happens is it's in response to a defense expert that's been called. So do I agree or disagree with that other expert? So I'm usually, the call usually comes first from the defense, but in terms of who I'm hired by, it's pretty even. It's about 50-50.
Now, this time, Your Honor, I'll proffer the witness as an expert in the field of forensic psychology.
Yes, approach.
Oh, Lord, they're already approaching. I don't know what's going to happen. Like, I don't know if, see, the state objected to him being proffered as an expert witness. I think the problem here is going to
Objection is
be,
sustained. Wait.
hold on a minute. I think the problem here is going to be, and he sustained the objection. The difference between an expert witness and another witness who's not qualified or proffered as an expert witness is that expert witnesses are allowed to give their opinions where other witnesses would not be allowed to. And so because he did not evaluate Sarah himself, I think the judge ruled correctly, in my opinion, that he should not be allowed to offer an opinion because he did not evaluate her. So that's going to be, I think, the crux. And I think that's why he said, no.
Objection is still sustained. Mr. Beck, you may continue.
They don't, I think what it is, Scott, is the state does not want, yes, he's clearly an expert. And if he had evaluated Sarah Boone, then I don't think the state would have objected. But because he did not evaluate Sarah Boone, the state does not want him giving opinions on battered spouse syndrome, I think, as it pertains to Sarah Boone. And that is why they objected, and it was sustained to him being proffered as an expert witness. He didn't evaluate her. So he should only be allowed to talk in very broad terms.
Been accepted, to your knowledge, in the Florida court system.
Yes, sir.
Objection, legal conclusion?
Sustained.
Can you describe the classic system or systemology wherein an individual might necessarily suffer and then exhibit symptoms of battered women syndrome?
Yes. So battered spouse syndrome is usually a woman's response. Doesn't have to be, but that's a classic historical research went into how women respond in situations in which there's intimate partner violence, when they've been the victim of violence. Now we know, of course, in other kinds of relationships, men can be a victim of it as well, or whether it's a heterosexual or homosexual relationship, that both men and women can be victims. But we still know the majority of those individuals that are diagnosed with that condition or given that condition, classified with that condition, are women. We do know that it's a reaction, a strategy that's developed by the person who's being abused to someone who's abusing them in an intimate partner situation. And essentially what they're doing is they've made a determination that they can't effectively escape from the abuse. They can't just leave for some reason. They feel in danger, or they've been threatened if they leave that something bad will happen to them. So it's a cognitive or thinking strategy on the part of the person being abused that I have to develop some coping skills or ways of protecting myself or maybe even loved ones as well from some form of imminent violence or danger or lethality. Something bad will happen to me if I don't develop a way of handling this abuse, this constant abuse that's coming towards me. So the battered wife syndrome is really a way of thinking. It's a psychological change that happens with a victim in terms of the way they cope and strategize to stay safe for themselves and other loved ones as well, oftentimes.
I'm going to ask a really silly question, if I may, Doctor. I don't know if you've noticed a bruise across the bridge of my nose this morning.
I did see that when I came in. Yes, sir.
Okay. This weekend, hypothetically, if an individual was digging around in the garbage, the lid fell down and cut his nose, the bridge of his nose wide open, would you, as a forensic psychologist, anticipate, or a psychologist in general, anticipate that there might be a physical or psychological reaction or response to that degree of trauma?
So I don't know if it would be trauma or not. It could be, depending on the degree of the injury and the pain and things like that. But certainly you'd view that garbage can differently as you approached it. So it changes your psychology or the way that you look at that particular situation or that particular object. So by viewing it differently, you may engage in different behaviors. You may approach it differently. You may have somebody else approach it. You may approach it with both hands up. So it changes your behavior and your thinking about that garbage can.
Does that also apply to interpersonal relationships?
So it certainly can. No two people always react the same way to every situation. Trauma, one person's trauma is not a trauma to another person. But for people who do develop battered spouse syndrome, they do begin to change the way they view the person who's abusing them and what they have to do in order to maintain either their life or their safety, their physical safety in terms of their behavior and interactions with that person.
Now, is there a specific set of criteria that a psychologist, forensic psychologist, would necessarily rely upon in attempting to make a diagnosis or assessment of battered women syndrome?
Yes, sir.
And what are those criteria?
Well, you'd want to see one, if some type of abuse has occurred. That abuse can be physical, it can be sexual, it can be emotional, or it can just be the threat of abuse or bad things that's going to happen to you. So there has to be something bad that's happened or that's threatened to be happening over a period of time. So abuse has to be present in order for this to be underway. Without abuse, there's no battered wife syndrome. But that's not enough. There also has to be what's called coercive control. Coercive control is really keeping the person's social interactions, overseen on a regular basis, controlling money, controlling preferences, even TV preferences, sometimes social media, looking at social media that the person is accessing or looking at, who they're talking to on Facebook, who they're texting. So it's a combination of abuse and coercive control that results in a person feeling victimized, but that's still not enough. That person then has to feel like they can't escape from that. They've either been told, if you leave me, you're going to die, or a family member is going to be harmed, your children, your mother, whatever it might be. And as a result of that, they develop strategies to cope with that, acquiescing, pleasing, doing anything they're asked to do, demeaning themselves, allowing themselves to be controlled, all of the things that would fend off, if you will, some abuse or attack or threat to them or someone who surrounds them. So those would be the components that you would need to have, and that dance continues to go on usually repeatedly throughout the course of that relationship.
So I think what you're describing is, in a sense, a subjective nature to the syndrome that's being described.
It's both objective and subjective. So objective in terms of the facts, like what's really happening. A person's being abused, they're being told certain things, there's control over them. But then a subjective part is the person's interpretation of that, their perception of that. So there's really both going on, and they have to kind of work together in order for this syndrome to be formalized and properly diagnosed.
You indicated that there sometimes may be some defense mechanisms that are, or strategies that are devised by the battered individual, the abused individual.
Yes, sir.
In your experience and your training, do controlled substances, alcohol, drugs frequently appear in your analysis or assessment?
Yes. And the way they appear is they can appear either from the abuser or the abused or both. What can happen from the abuser standpoint is they may only be abusive, or the abuse may become worse if they abuse substances. From the abused standpoint, it may be self-medication. It may be a way of coping with the anxiety that there's going to be something bad that potentially could happen to them or somebody else. It's kind of a way of dealing with walking on the eggshells. So if I use substances, that can deaden the pain, if you will, for me, or help me to forget about it. So it's oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes part of either the abuser's behavior or the abused behavior.
Do they, in your experience, do they on occasion actually defend the individual that is abusing them?
That's a very frequent part of this syndrome. Not always, but it's very frequent. It's why interviewing them becomes difficult sometimes, because they're used to explaining away their behavior, the abuser's behavior, my black eye, my missing tooth, his screaming and yelling in the background while I'm talking to mom on the phone. So they're used to making excuses for it. It's part of the coping strategy, trying to explain away this behavior. He's had a bad day. She's, really upset about something else that's going on. She's really never like this at any other time. So defending that person is oftentimes a part of the battered spouse syndrome, and getting the person who's been abused to get them to stop defending them so they can talk about the actual abuse becomes a challenge.
Now, the DSM makes reference on occasion to rule outs, I assume for the diagnosis that's being applied. What is a rule out?
A rule out in our parlance says that we should consider these things before we look at other diagnoses. So, for instance, if we're going to consider schizophrenia, we should rule out substance abuse first, because oftentimes some drugs can create hallucinations and delusions and psychotic symptoms. So there's always rule out, just like there are for medical conditions. So look for this before you consider this, is really what a rule out is.
Are there specific rule outs for battered woman syndrome or PTSD?
Sure. So there's rule outs for everything, because you're considering a number of different conditions before you make a differential diagnosis, or you pick that's the one that I think best fits this person. So yes, there's rule outs for both of those.
For my sake, what is a differential diagnosis?
That's how you decide which one. Whether it's your medical doctor, your psychologist, whoever. It's how they pick the right diagnosis. So you're going through kind of a card catalog in your head, and you're saying, all right, there's symptoms of this, but that's also consistent with symptoms of that. So is it schizophrenia? Is it bipolar disorder? Now I have to ask more questions. It's a decision tree. And that decision tree helps you to inform the person and either make a diagnosis in a legal setting or help to treat them clinically.
Now, if the individual, the psychologist who's doing the evaluation identifies the presence of certain rule outs, what is their response professionally to those rule outs in establishing or assessing the patient?
You have to go down a decision tree. We all kind of do decision trees in our mind every day about what we should do or shouldn't do in certain.
I have to pause here for a commentary and under fair use. And I'd like to say that I don't particularly think that I have a decision tree per se in my head. Mine is probably more like a decision bush. That's how I would describe my decision-making skills. Sometimes my decisions are better than others, but whatever. Let's just keep going.
Situations, it happens automatically. It's more structured when you're doing it professionally. So if you have a concern about substances, then you would kind of take that track and you'd have to ask a lot of questions in that area. So you'd want to know what kind of substances, how often are they using those substances, what kind of effect have those substances had on them before. I just picked one of many possible rule outs there, but every one of them you'd have to explore or ask additional questions because, of course, you don't want to come up with a wrong diagnosis because in a legal setting, that leads you to a bad opinion. In a clinical setting, it leads to bad treatment.
Now, I want to go back just a second. We talked about the subjective nature of the abused individual's understanding of what's happening. Does this subjective or does the experience that they have suffered result in, on occasion, their experiencing or their anticipating or assuming or imagining a threat that others may not?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
While they approach, I'd like to also take this opportunity to remind Mr. Beck that there is a microphone on that podium in front of you, sir. Please turn it on. There are other people, or maybe you, I don't know if there's a microphone on the podium or if they have microphones in their pocket. Whatever the case may be, would you please utilize your microphone correctly? I don't understand what is happening over at the defense table where every single person at that table, including Sarah Boone herself, does not understand the use and function of a microphone. This is not new technology. Microphones have been around for a very, very long time. I do not understand this phenomenon that occurs with every single person at that defense table. But it is, let's study, maybe there can be a study on that. Is the misuse of the microphone intentional? Is it unintentional? What's happening over here? Because I don't understand, and it's a little irritating. Actually, it's more than a
Objection
little
is sustained.
irritating. It's very frustrating.
Doctor, from what you've described this morning, I think we're talking about a complex and sophisticated process for assessing and diagnosing PTSD, battered women, the matters that you described. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, sir.
And in this instance, this particular matter regarding the state versus Sarah Boone, were you approached about the possibility of doing an assessment as to Sarah Boone?
Approach.
Also, while they approach again, I would only imagine that this is the fourth round for the fruit platter from Publix. I'm just kidding. I'm sure that this is complicated, and I'm just trying to make a little bit of light and levity out of this situation. I'm going to need Music City Mom to please hit me up with the name of these pretzels that you are partaking in on this Wednesday morning, as I too enjoy the pretzel. And I find a problem with mainly with pretzels, the pretzel sticks, is the inconsistency in which they are salted. See, I like my pretzels to contain a high salt content, but I like for every pretzel stick to have the same level of salt on each stick. And I get very upset and frustrated when that does not occur. I'm all about consistency, which is interesting given the fact that I am an Aquarius and we are known to be rather, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, it starts with a C, and contradictory. We will argue just to argue, but I need consistency. And we're also quite rebellious and don't like conformity. But when it comes to my food, I need every bite to taste the same. I like uniformity when it comes to my food. It's very important to me. Yes. Ooh, Jennifer, you are going to love, love, love your music melts. I am not on the cusp of being an Aquarius. I am January 28th. I'm a full Aquarian baby, which explains my love of water. I also was on the swim team growing up. I love to swim. I love to be near the water. I love water, period. And hold on a second. Let me check my email because I see that I was emailed. So I'm checking that currently.
Doctor, when you are retained to do an evaluation in these matters, what is your practice in regards to the assessment proceedings, the assessment efforts?
Well, I'd first want to know what type of an assessment that it is, because there's different methods of approach that you'd use to analyze and be able to give an opinion on whatever question's being asked of you. So the very first goal for me as a forensic psychologist is to isolate what the question is. So what are they asking me to do? Because I want to know, A, can I do that? Am I qualified to do that, or should I refer that to somebody else? Or B, is that something I'm going to have enough time to do and enough resources to do? Then the next thing I would do is start asking questions about specifically what you already have or what can you get to help me answer this question. So right away, I'd start to find out what's available. As forensic psychologists, we're supposed to do comprehensive evaluations of whatever the legal issue or question is. And it's supposed to rely on multiple sources of information. So depending again upon the question, I'm trying to then define early on what are those multiple pieces of information I'm going to need to help to try to give an opinion and an educated opinion about that matter.
Have you done an assessment in this particular case?
No, sir.
Can you tell us very briefly whether that was your decision?
Objection, relevance.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I can move on.
Objection sustained.
In your experience, doctor,
Thank you very much.
can battered women syndrome rear its ugly head? For instance, when there are threats to other members of the family, two-legged or four?
So yes, sir, it's very common that it's not just the person. It increases the terror from someone who's doing the abuse. to mention other family members that they might also suffer abuse. So whether it's emotional or physical, those type of things are very common. Not always, but it's very common in the course of domestic violence cases or intimate partner violence cases.
And that fear that's developed by the abused individual may exist contemporaneously with other issues, alcoholism, schizophrenia, and the like. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. They can all be combined together. And certainly that increases if there's other family members that are threatened or live in the same home or close by. That can increase the terror. The purpose of that is to increase control, to make sure the abuser has more control over the person who's being abused.
1 second, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
I think, yes, it's possible that Brian Boone will be recalled by the state. It's also quite possible that Brian Boone will
In
be
doing an
recalled by the
assessment, doctor,
defense.
do you look at outside materials?
Yes, sir, always.
And what kind of outside materials do you necessarily review in order to make this assessment?
Specifically to battered woman syndrome?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So specific to this, you'd want to look at a lot of different sources of information because you're trying to, make a diagnosis if there's a trauma-related disorder, but you're also trying to figure out if there's the other elements necessary to make the diagnosis as well, like abuse that's been chronic over a period of time, and that the person feels they can't leave that situation, and if other people have been threatened. So you'd want to know things like not only what the facts are of the particular incident, usually some crime that's been committed, but you'd want to know the history of those behaviors. Has anyone else seen those? Are there people you can talk to? You know, friends, neighbors, bosses, anybody who's seen or heard of this abuse before? Have there been medical visits where the person has actually been damaged and shown up, made some other excuse, they slipped or fell or whatever it might be? You'd want to do psychological testing as a forensic psychologist because we have very good tests that help us to determine whether someone's suffering from a trauma-based disorder or not. You'd want to know if the person who'd been accused of the crime for this type of evaluation made any statements to the police. If they did, you'd want to hear that statement. Or has there been a 911 call or calls? If that's happened, you'd want to hear that too. So any evidence you could collect, and these are some of those questions I was talking to you about before, you'd want to ask the person who's trying to hire you in the beginning, well, tell me what you have, because you'd want to see whether or not you're going to be able to make this analysis or not. So it's not good enough just to talk to the person, because that's just one form of information. It's almost like being a behavioral detective, if you will, as a forensic psychologist, because we're trying to get as much evidence wrapping around our interview with the person as possible to be able to guide our questions, but inform us and see whether there's what we call convergent validity. It's a fancy way of saying, does everything agree with each other? Does everything connect in a way that it all sort of makes sense? Or are these strange conflicting pieces of evidence that we need to explain away, or it just doesn't fit the criteria? So it's a rather comprehensive and complex evaluation has to be conducted to come up with this. And the final piece I'd say about it is that because oftentimes the abused person is defending still the person that they've oftentimes committed a crime against, it takes a bit of time to get to where you need to go. With all victims of trauma, whether you're talking about situations where you're doing therapy or you're doing an analysis in this type of setting, a criminal setting, it usually takes some time to break through that and get them to trust you to talk about the trauma, but to stop defending the person and talk about the abuse and how they felt about the abuse. Your goal, if you will, is to be able to see what's happening in that situation through the abused person's eyes. If you look at it through your eyes, often it doesn't seem to make sense. But if you look at it through their eyes, if it meets the criteria for a battered spouse, then you can better understand their world and what they're dealing with.
And real briefly, some of the things that you are evaluating when you examine, particularly the individual themselves, you're looking for anxiety and or fear.
Yes.
Low self-esteem.
Yes.
Are you looking for depression?
Yes.
Are you looking for any form of social or interpersonal withdrawal?
Withdrawal, especially if it's forced withdrawal, controlled withdrawal, if there's consequences to socializing with my family, my friends, calling them on the phone, texting them. So especially in that context.
Stockholm syndrome.
Sure, that can be part of it.
And what is Stockholm syndrome, real briefly?
So it's really adapting to someone who's captive or taking over a person, controlling their life, sort of adapting to that situation. The famous model of that would be many, many decades ago, a woman called Patty Hearst, who was kidnapped. But it's taking on the beliefs and taking on an acceptance, if you will, of a kind of a captive situation. And in these situations with women who have been abused, who meet the criteria for battered spouse syndrome, they oftentimes adapt, defend, and take on in an acquiescent way that this is okay and I'm part of this situation as opposed to opposed to the situation.
Will this syndrome exhibit itself in physical attributes?
It can, at times, even physical illness at times.
Inability to sleep, inability to keep food down, and those type of things.
Sure. Yes, sir.
Would that individual potentially experience hypervigilance?
Well, that's a large part of it. Of any trauma-based disorder is hypervigilance. What changes when you've been traumatized, any kind of trauma, not just abuse, but what changes is your perception of danger. So whether it's the lid of the garbage can hitting on your nose, or whether it's someone being abusive towards you, those situations change your perception of danger. So you no longer see that object or that person in the same way. You have a foreboding sense of danger could occur. So other people may not perceive it with that person. He's so nice at work, or he's nice in these other settings, or he's so great on the softball field, but at home he's different. So that person who's being abused, their perception changes.
Does that include denial?
It could include denial, and oftentimes that's part of the explanation. The defensiveness of that person is the denial of how bad things are that are going on.
I feel like the state is not really saying anything here.
Cross-examination.
Hang on just a second. I don't want to interrupt the state. I feel like the state is not really saying anything here because, to be quite honest, I'm getting the sense that many of these criteria that he's talking about and behaviors that an individual who is abused may exhibit, Sarah Boone doesn't actually exhibit doesn't exhibit them. So maybe that's why they're not saying anything. I don't know. Here we go.
Morning, doctor.
Good morning.
Nice to see you in person.
Good to see you again.
So there's a subjective component to trauma, is what I understand you're saying, correct?
Always. Yes, sir.
And so hypothetically, a couple could be in a 3.5-year relationship with physical violence, emotional violence, even sexual violence. But either or both of those partners may or may not believe that is a traumatic experience for him or herself, correct?
Yes, sir. People mistake the stimulus about what happens as the trauma. The trauma is really the reaction to it. So bad things that happen, people don't always react in the same way to them. So yes, sir, that's correct.
So for instance, a homicide detective or a homicide prosecutor may go out to a scene and see a freshly dead body, and their perception of that environmental stimulus may be very different from somebody who works at Dunkin' Donuts and just gives us muffins in the morning coming across a dead body. Is that fair?
Yes, sir. That homicide detective may be able to go eat lunch right after it, and the other person who works at the donut restaurant may not be able to eat for a couple of days as a result. So yes, perception is a big part of how trauma occurs.
And I understand your answers today, and I'm not saying that they were different the other day. But I understand you to say that it's very important to do a comprehensive evaluation to get the full picture of what is going on in the perceived battered spouse mind, correct?
Yes.
I mean, I don't see the issue with that question because, I think it's a good question. I think So Carol asks, why do they not have an actual doctor evaluate Sarah's testimony? Sarah was evaluated by two forensic psychiatrists. So for the defense, Dr. last name starts with an H, and I keep wanting to say something that's not Horton. Dr. Horton, or Harper, sorry. See, I knew I was going to get it wrong. Dr. Julie Harper is who evaluated Sarah for the defense. Dr. Warner is who evaluated Sarah for the state. I'm guessing that the defense wanted to have a doctor testify to battered spouse syndrome in general, because so that they could focus their questioning and their testimony with Dr. Harper solely on Sarah Boone, so that the jury could hear.
The objection is overruled.
Hold on a second. I think what their plan is not to overwhelm the jury. So 2 different witnesses. I think their thought process is, let's have one witness come in and deal with the explanation of what battered spouse syndrome is and behaviors that someone with battered spouse syndrome or person syndrome exhibits. Okay. So that when Dr. Julie Harper goes in and testifies to her evaluation of Sarah Boone, they have the definitions, they have the list of potential behaviors, et cetera, in the back of their minds when she is testifying. And therefore, I think that that's the goal here. To me, what I'm hearing, quite frankly, is that Sarah Boone doesn't tick many of the boxes. I think she ticks more boxes. How do I put this? She exhibits less behaviors of an individual with battered person syndrome than she exhibits behaviors of a person with battered person syndrome, going by the testimony of this doctor. That's my opinion at this point anyway. It might change.
We've been talking about the importance of doing a comprehensive evaluation with as many collateral sources as one could possibly have when making an assessment about the battered spouse syndrome, correct?
Yes, sir. Relevant piece of information. Yes, sir.
And would you agree that obviously the person who is accused of committing a crime, there are credibility issues that you do need to care for when relying upon that person's history provided about the events leading to that and the past events describing the relationship with the intimate partner?
Yes, sir. In every forensic evaluation, that's the case.
Is this particularly important if there's a comorbidity with an alcohol abuse disorder?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury what alcohol abuse disorder means in the DSM-5 TR?
Sure. It's the biggest part of it is it's not just the use of alcohol, it's impairment that happens as a result. So it's the excessive use of alcohol, but that could mean something different, just like the excessive use of marijuana might mean. But it's the use of alcohol to the degree that it impairs or infects a person's life. And with that may come a lot of other things like deceitfulness or aggression or unreliability, sleep or somatic problems, difficulties. So, but the important thing to remember there is that it's the use of a substance that impairs or affects a person's life.
And if there is alcohol involved in the histories being given about either the event in question or any preceding events, must the evaluator take that into account when evaluating the memories and perceptions of the person giving them that history?
Yes. So in introducing that new topic about memory, we know that substances can interfere and impair memory. So as a result of that, you'd want to know what they were using, how close it was. If you're talking about a particular event, like a crime, you'd want to know if there was substance usage, and if so, what the person's memory functioning was, and does that match up with other sources of information about what those events were.
Are you familiar with the narcissistic personality disorder?
Yes, sir, of course.
Is that something recognized in the DSM-5 TR?
Yes, sir.
And can you tell us whether or not a person who is giving a history, whether it's the patient/client or whatnot, has traits, perhaps not a diagnosis, but even just traits of the narcissistic personality disorder? Is that something the evaluator should account for in evaluating the credibility of the history given?
Yes.
And why is that?
Well, because all forms of disorders or conditions or just traits may lead to inaccurate information, either not purposely or purposely. They may be deceptive. So certain personality disorders or traits can lead to deception or inappropriate or inaccurate information. That's why you need more than one source of information. Does what this is what this person's saying to me check out with other sources of information?
And I don't mean to quiz you on it, but can you tell us some of the criteria for the narcissistic personality disorder?
I can, yes, sir. So it is a grandiose sense of self-worth. It's the consideration of yourself over anybody else. It's kind of operating in your own world. So it's an inflated sense of who you are. It's a misperception of how important you are to other people and your meaning to other people. It's a sense of specialness, that you stand out from other people in terms of special skill or skills, and that other people, if they don't recognize that, they should recognize that. So the biggest heading there is an inflated sense of self-esteem and grandiosity.
Yes, Mr. J is conducting the cross-examination.
Are you familiar with an adjustment disorder diagnosis?
Yes, sir.
And is that in the DSM-5 TR?
Yes, sir. Correct.
Can you tell us about that?
Adjustment disorder is a person's reaction, and it could be emotional, it can be behavioral, or it can be both, to a situation that occurs. You broke up with your boyfriend or girlfriend, so you're upset about that. And so as a result, you're tearful, you're anxious or nervous or worried about what may happen to you as a result of breaking up with them, or you behaviorally may start not going to work, or get into more arguments or fights with your children as a result. So it's a temporary reaction to a stressful situation that occurs in some individuals.
And hypothetically, if a person who is giving a history for criteria of diagnosis, let me strike that. If somebody is giving a history and that is being used to come to an evaluation conclusion of battered spouse syndrome, if that person has been diagnosed with adjustment disorder predating the traumatic relationship, is that something the evaluator should take into account?
You'd want to know any prior diagnosis, because it may not necessarily be exclusionary, but it could. So adjustment disorder is a temporary reaction. You're upset in a temporary period, and most of them just go away on their own. Whereas something else like a traumatic stress disorder is long-term. It's something that a person's stuck with for a period of time that usually doesn't just go away on its own. So yes, you'd want to know that for that term I used before, that differential diagnosis. You'd want to know those things to compare and contrast them and hold them up against each other.
Now, hypothetically, if somebody says things like, I'm the best thing that has ever happened to you, and I'm the best you'll ever do, are those indications of the narcissistic personality disorder?
Well, they could be. You wouldn't want just that alone. You'd want to see if that was happening in other settings. Is that happening on the job, with friends, with family members? Is it showing up on psychological testing? But certainly that would be a red flag. You'd go, I want to pay more attention to that. I want to investigate that further.
And is it important when evaluating trauma-based disorders, because they're based on emotional reactions, to do that rule out on alcohol or drug use?
Certainly you'd want to do that. It's not usually disguised as a trauma-based disorder. Alcohol and trauma aren't usually rule outs for each other, but it could exacerbate a condition. It could make you diagnose a trauma condition when it's just an adjustment disorder. I say just, I don't mean to minimize it, but it's not as serious as a trauma-based disorder.
Is it important to consider whether the abuser and or the abused behave differently in the absence of alcohol or drugs?
Yes.
And why is that?
Well, because you're trying to analyze a psychological condition. If as a result of drug or alcohol abuse, their behavior changes or their perceptions change, that's not a psychological condition, that's a substance abuse disorder. So that's why you'd want to know that. So if their condition remains the same, maybe it's a little worse when they're using drugs or alcohol, but it's the same perception of threat or danger, then you're going to diagnose a trauma-based disorder. If not, then you're going to diagnose a substance abuse disorder. You can have both, but you'd want to rule one out as opposed to the other.
And are you familiar with the classic three-step cycle of battered spouse syndrome or domestic violence?
Yes, sir, I
Can
am.
you explain that to the jury?
Sure. So there's a cycle of violence that was first developed by a woman in the 70s called Lenore Walker, Dr. Lenore Walker. She's a psychologist who's usually credited with developing the whole theory of battered spouse syndrome. And in the classic model, which we know oftentimes happens, not every time, but in the classic model, there's a period of tension buildup where things are happening, little arguments are happening, there's bickering back and forth, there may be some threats or some loud voices back and forth, but it's all things that are leading up to a possible violent episode. Then there's the episode that happens itself, the violent episode. It could be verbal, sexual, physical, but there's the violent incident that occurs. And then after that violent episode occurs, there's a honeymoon phase where the person who's done the abuse, they're apologizing, taking that person who was abused out to dinner, buying them things, saying nice things to them, complimenting them to sort of make up for the abuse. And it's it's called the cycle of violence. And the reason why is it tends to repeat itself in a lot of these situations of battered spouse syndrome, where you see this repeating itself over and over and over again. So people are kind of stuck in these revolving doors in their relationship.
And can one cycle be enough to traumatize a person?
Yes.
Does this trauma necessarily have to be coming from a man to a woman?
No.
And in fact, as times have changed, language has changed. And so when we keep referring to it as battered woman syndrome in the courtroom today, what we're actually talking about now is battered spouse syndrome or even intimate partner violence.
Yes, sir. I mean, interpartner violence can happen outside of legal settings, but it's really a kind of the large over grouping, if you will, to be able to talk about all of these other things that can happen as a result, like trauma-based disorders and battered spouse syndrome. And you're right. The later research has kind of pulled us away from thinking this only happens to women in heterosexual relationships. We know now there's all sorts of derivations, and that men can suffer also from battered spouse syndrome, battered person syndrome, homosexual couples. So we know it goes around to everybody, but still, women are more often diagnosed with battered spouse syndrome than anybody else.
Does the trauma have to come in the form of physical violence?
No, sir.
Does it have to come in the form of sexual violence?
No, sir.
Can it come in the form of emotional or mental violence?
Yes, sir.
And would examples of that include such as running the partner down and telling them that they're no good and, just general insulting and lowering their value?
It could. Remember, that's the stimulus, so it would depend on how the person who's receiving that responds to it as to whether or not it becomes traumatic. But yes, sir, that'd be the first red flag you'd want to investigate.
And you mentioned isolation before. So if somebody in a hypothetical intimate partner setting is trying to isolate the partner from his or her family members or friends or coworkers, can that be, and I'm not saying necessarily, can that be indications of intimate partner violence that could lead to battered spouse?
So sure, that'd be an example of coercive control. So if a person was doing that, that's consistent with that classification of battered person syndrome. Yes.
And hypothetically, controlling another person, the intimate partner's personal property or effects, such as a birth certificate or identification papers, can that be indication of emotional trauma towards the partner who is lacking the control over those identification papers?
So that's a stimulus that could result, depending on how the person subjectively perceives it, in some trauma. So yes, all of the things that you mentioned could be stimulus, if you will, that a person could perceive as traumatic.
And hypothetically, if one partner A gives partner B a gift, such as a bicycle, but partner A continues to maintain that the bicycle is his or hers because he or she bought it, even though it was a gift of B, can that be a form of emotional abuse towards B?
Sure, it sounds like control, but I guess you could interpret it as emotional abuse too, but it sounds more like a control mechanism that'd be consistent.
I'm not suggesting that it's legally or morally okay, but when one intimate partner does these hypothetical emotional things, non-physical violent things to partner B, if partner B has poor personal skills and coping skills and maybe consuming alcohol, is it unreasonable or unfathomable to hear that partner B responded with physical violence to partner B?
Objection, assuming facts not in evidence.
Sustained. Yes.
Wow. This was really good cross-examination, I think, for Mr. J. Yikes. I think that this is really interesting because it is subjective. And I think that it's important for the jury to understand that when we're talking about these types of situations, it's not a black and white issue. There's a lot of gray and there's a lot of overlap in in these behaviors. And then I think that when you add chronic substance, in this situation, alcohol
After hearing
use,
argument of counsel, the objection is overruled.
So let me respond to that.
after, with the, I'll finish it, my thought after they talk.
If you remember the question,
Do.
please go ahead.
So it would increase the probability of physical violence. So if those things, in fact, were perceived as threatening or abusive in any way or insulting to the person who they were directed towards, it would increase the probability of physical violence.
And then again, the perceptions are all in the eye of the beholder, whether emotional things that are said to one another or physical things are done to one another, whether the recipient of that behavior views it as trauma is a subjective decision by that person, right?
Yes, the perception is the impact. So that's how you would know that. It's just, water off a duck's back, or is it something that kind of sticks with me and I think about it all the time?
Now, you mentioned earlier, anxiety, low self-esteem, and depression can all be components of battered spouse syndrome, correct?
Correct.
Is it important as the evaluator to rule out whether or not these conditions predated the violent or abusive relationship?
Yes.
And why is that?
Well, because where things start is important diagnostically. So if all of those things were in place, all of the symptoms that were just mentioned are in place, then you wouldn't attribute those to the abuse. You'd say those things were pre-existing. Now, abuse could make it worse, but in terms of your diagnosis, you need to know where things started. So if those symptoms didn't start at the time where there was abuse that was alleged to have occurred, then it's unlikely that it's attributed to that abuse.
And independent of any narcissistic personality disorder traits, would you agree that anybody in a certain legal setting has a motivation to present themselves in a certain way?
Yes. To do impression management, either depending on the outcome. So if there's punitive sanctions, they may lie to make themselves look worse, or as a result, if they're in other settings like divorce settings, they may lie to make themselves look better. So there's always some impression management you have to kind of look through in your evaluation.
And that's important for an evaluator.
It should be looked at in every evaluation.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any redirect examination?
Just want to, one more time, in response to the state's questioning, you indicated that where an individual's credibility may be in question, there is a necessity that the individual who's making the assessment corroborate whatever they're being told. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. In a number of different ways. We have psychological tests that assess for things called malingering or faking mental health problems or difficulties. So you'd want to do that. You'd want to look at other evidence to see if it's all consistent. So it's very important you don't just rely on self-report.
Is it possible that an individual may exhibit one or two attributes of a particular DSM diagnosis, but not actually qualify because it's simply not there?
Right, sure. So sometimes like social isolation can be because we're introverted, or it could be part of depression. So you need to kind of follow it out and see how many of the symptoms are there to see whether or not it meets the criteria.
So I may exhibit one or two symptoms of narcissism, but not qualify because I don't meet all of those, or a significant number of the indicators that you would rely upon to make that diagnosis.
Yes, sir. Or it can be situationally based, like we may display narcissistic features here in a courtroom, but may not do that in any other part of our life.
Now, in your experience, have you learned either through your studies, experience, and so on, whether or not the abusive behavior may begin based upon an individual's perception of things occurring to him as a child or her as a child. In other words, if they grow up in an abusive household.
Okay, I understand.
Sustained.
You've indicated that there are things that, I think in response to the state's cross-examination, that there are things that may add to or may contribute to a particular psychosis or symptom. Would an individual's background as a child include those type of criteria?
Yes, sir. You're more vulnerable to certain psychological conditions based on your history. So if you've been traumatized before, or bad situations have happened to you before, if you've suffered from depression before, it makes you more vulnerable to those conditions or other conditions later on.
Finally, one question or one symptom that we haven't discussed, I don't think, or maybe it was discussed by the state, was learned helplessness. What is that?
Learned helplessness, I've really spoken about it a little bit, but now we have the fancy term for it. Learned helplessness was really researched by someone named Seligson, a doctor named Seligson, psychologist, research psychologist. And just real briefly, what it is, it's when someone kind of gives up and feels like there's nothing that they can do to change their situation. It was originally done with laboratory animals. But where a person really feels that no matter what strategy they've taken, like leave, stay, fight, whatever it might be, it won't work. It usually leads to depression or developments of other strategies, like I have to appease or please or make sure I do everything correctly or apologize. So it's really believing that no matter what you do, it won't be effective.
Doctor, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for
Sure.
traveling up here from Miami so early in the morning.
No problem at all.
Thanks for the rest.
Thank you, sir. You can be excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Get the parties approach for a moment.
I actually think that that was really, really interesting testimony, because I do think that, let's just call it what it is. All right. Sarah, as an individual, as a person, doesn't really people well. She's not she doesn't have, like, she's not winning any congeniality portions of pageants, okay? She's just not a real likable gal. She doesn't people very well, okay? She's unlikable. But I think that it's important for the purposes of discussing what we're here to discuss, which is, is she guilty of second-degree murder? Or, as this defense purports, did she use a form of self-defense? Were her actions justifiable? And I think that with all human beings, right? Everything is subjective and nobody is all things at all times. Okay. But listening to this testimony, I am starting to wonder about some things respective more to George than actually Sarah. I'm starting to wonder if...
All right, members of the jury, it is 10:40 at this time. We're going to go ahead and take that mid-morning break.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. I'm starting to wonder a little bit if George in this situation may have been the battered spouse, the person who likely had battered spouse syndrome more than Sarah. And that maybe what we're missing out here is that there is a broader, bigger picture, as there always is in cases of domestic violence, okay? I'm starting to really wonder more about the details surrounding the prior incidents of abuse where George is the perpetrator. I'm starting to wonder, I want to be very, very clear here, okay? It is my opinion that unless you are defending yourself. There's no reason for you to ever put your hands on another person, okay? Whether you are a female or a male, you don't put your hands on your partner, period. It doesn't matter. That's the sex of the individual is irrelevant. The gender of the individual is irrelevant to me. I don't think you should. We all learned in kindergarten to keep our hands, feet, and all objects to ourselves. Okay. That was like rule number one in school, elementary school. Now, that being said, I wonder sometimes if in certain circumstances where George was the perpetrator, meaning the one that was actually arrested and charged with domestic violence, if he reacted physically to something, if he reacted with physical abuse to some type of mental abuse that Sarah was perpetrating. For example, we talked this morning about the scenario under which the suitcase, all of it occurred, right? And Sarah had testified that she said she was joking with George about him being small enough to fit in a suitcase. And I'm wondering if what was really going on is Sarah uses the term joking. But when you demean a person, right, and you say something to the effect of, what kind of man is small enough to fit into a suitcase? You know, that's just an example. I don't know if she said this or not, but in the context of things, I'm actually kind of wondering if that is more of what the scenario under which these domestic violence circumstances occurred. If what Sarah was doing was mental and emotional abuse, and George reacted with physical abuse, which I don't agree with on either part. But I'm wondering if that's what we're looking at here. Does that negate the abuse that Sarah suffered at the hands of George? No, it doesn't. It doesn't negate that she got a black eye. It doesn't, but I am also, okay, and this is important to me anyway, okay? If Sarah has a personality disorder, as Mr. J was questioning the witness on the stand about, does that impact? And if it does impact, how much does it impact her version of events? She's the one. George has no voice anymore. Sarah effectively silenced him. She wanted him to listen in that suitcase. That's what she testified to. And now he's no longer able to listen, but more importantly, which is why you would put somebody in the suit, which is what Sarah did. She wanted him to be quiet and listen. And now he's permanently quiet. Now he has no voice, his own voice, right? He can't speak, can't defend himself. He can't explain the circumstances of the situations that occurred between the two of them, right? She has effectively silenced him. So I want to know if Sarah has a personality disorder, what the personality disorder is, and how that impacts her version of events. How credible is she in telling what happened in those circumstances where the pictures were shown of her injuries? That's what I want to know, because it's important. All of this this entire defense hinges on Sarah's perception. Okay. And if there are other factors at play in her perception, not just battered spouse syndrome,
Counsel's table? Yes, Mr.
but other potential mental health illnesses or illness or personality disorder or disorders, all of those facts, in my opinion, are relevant and important, and we need to know those. I'm curious about those.
Mr. Owens.
Judge, we had several late witnesses that were scheduled.
Oh, here we go with the freaking excuses.
We've excused Detective Scott Lowen based on the testimony of Detective Koepsell. We've excused Abraham Marino, who was going to be recalled based on the testimony of Detective Koepsell. You've heard from the two deputies, you've heard from Dr. Brandon. Maria Gallup-Holy is a young lady that's outside. She was a witness as a neighbor in that complex, and she would testify about observing physical injuries to Sarah Boone. We've spoken with her over the break that, in our opinions collectively, Tony Anderson and myself, that it's not necessary to call Ms. Gallup-Holy if we have other evidence of injuries. There was disagreement about that, but I believe that Ms. Boone is now in agreement that we're not going to call Ms. Gallup-Holy. So that
Owens checked Boone. Oh my gosh.
calling the Orange County Sheriff's Department phone extraction expert.
Ms. Uwadden.
Yes, back to the stand. We've got two short videos. These are the short videos relating to Jorge Torres with a bat and then striking the TV.
Oh, we're going to see those videos.
The problem with that is because we've excused so many witnesses, that's our last witness. So we're going to be done here in probably 11:15. And then,
But Ms. Walker is supposed to be here at 1 o'clock?
that's correct.
Okay, all right.
And then I haven't had a chance to meet with Dr. Harper, but I'm.
Fantastic. He's flipping everybody off.
And we anticipate Dr. Harper this afternoon. And then we may be really close to ending the defense's case.
Okay,
What?
great. Thank you for letting me know that.
But we're gonna have a gap here.
Okay, so
Early lunch.
well,
or
yeah.
long lunch.
That may, well, if you're saying that your presentation with Ms. Uwadden is 15 minutes, I don't know what the cross is going to be. It may be de minimis, or you may be saving her for rebuttal. I don't know. Mr. J or Mr. Cacciatore? As it relates to Ms. Uwadden, CSI Tech, you're not calling her in
She already
rebuttal?
made a predicate during her trial testimony during our case in chief. Exhibit on rebuttal.
Okay, awesome. So what we can do is we can proceed with Ms. Uwadden, and we could just take an early lunch and ask them to be back here maybe 12:50. So that way, if we have any issues, we can address them before we start at 1 o'clock. Ms. Boone, you were sworn this morning. I just got a couple of things to go over with you. There was a list of witnesses that was provided to the court last night and again this morning as potential witnesses that may be called in your defense. One of those witnesses was Maria Gallup-Holy. Your lawyers have advised that they may not be calling that person as a witness in this case. Do you understand that?
I do.
And again, similar to other conversations we've had, I don't want to go into any specifics of any conversations that you've had with any of your lawyers, just whether or not you've had them. Have you had conversations with your lawyers about calling Ms. Gallup-Holy as a witness?
Yes.
Have you had conversations with your attorneys about why they are deciding not to call her as a witness?
Yes.
And similar to what we discussed yesterday, do you understand that your attorneys make the trial strategy decisions, including what witnesses to call or not to call?
Yes.
Okay. Are you still satisfied with their representation of you in this matter?
Yes.
And are you still on board with the strategy that has been employed in your defense?
Yes.
Are you in agreement with the strategy not to call Ms. Gallup-Holy as a witness in this case?
I am.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, ma'am. Then let's go ahead and bring our jury back in and we can call Ms. Uwadden and go from there.
Mr.
All right.
Lane, can you you excuse Ms. Gallagher?
So let me get this straight, Mr. Owens. Let me just summarize for you guys. Ms. Gallipoli is the witness that they were discussing this entire week about her potentially testifying by Zoom, when she would be deposed, all of those things. Okay. And now, suddenly, she was a witness scheduled for today, but for some reason, the defense has decided that they do not want to call her as a witness. She is a neighbor of Sarah Boone's, who apparently saw some bruising or injuries that Sarah Boone sustained. There's a reason that the defense is not calling her after they made such a fuss about calling her. And it is my understanding that she requires a caretaker. What that means in the context of things, I don't know, because people can require caretakers for different reasons. Okay. And they're not calling her. I would guess the reason that they've decided not to call her is they don't want to take the chance. See, it would be my opinion, and this would be if I, thinking if I were a pretend lawyer, that I wouldn't want a neighbor who may have witnessed many things over the course of being a neighbor to be testifying if she was going to testify that my client had injuries, and then upon deposition, it's discovered, mainly deposition, obviously the deposition would be from the state, that she also witnessed behavior of abuse, physical, towards George. I think that might be the reason why they're not calling her. She must have witnessed something that they don't want her to testify to. Now, that being said, they're going to call Missy the CSI phone tech expert, okay? And it sounds to me from Mr. Owens, which I can't even believe I'm relying on Mr. Owens' word because he flip-flops so much, but here we are. The video that was discussed yesterday, where the still pictures were taken from of George with this TV, apparently, I don't know if they're going to play that video. I don't know, but she's here about that video that was downloaded from Sarah's phone during the extraction. So without further ado, let's get the show on the road.
Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and stand and bring back in our panel.
And then it sounds like we're going to have a long lunch. And then we're going to come back. Also, welcome in, Brenda. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you. We love new people. Yes, Violet, Rachel is correct. She is talking about Kim and Eli. Apparently, the allegation by Sarah back in 2020 was that Eli was not here legally, and he's working on his getting his citizenship. And yeah. Right, Rachel. Kim just isn't a nice person for no reason. While Sarah, see, the thing about Sarah, I really am so curious. I'm excited for Dr. Harper to testify this afternoon, because I do think that her testimony, her evaluation, I'm curious what she came up with.
State, you recognize our jury?
Yes, sir.
Defense, do you recognize our jury?
Yes.
I think you all could be seated. Members of the jury, once seated again, if you could confirm that you complied with the court's instructions during our break by raising your hands. Record reflect all hands have been raised. Defense, you may call your next witness.
Judge, we would call forensic phone extraction officer with the Orange County Sheriff's Department, Officer Wadden.
Right.
To the stand.
Thank you. We'll bring her in.
You know, I think that it's hard to hear this testimony, you know, about George, because when it comes to adults, there's no such thing as a perfect victim. But when you reach adulthood, you've done some things in your life because it's not perfect. In my opinion, the only truly innocent victim, is our children. I don't give a rat's fat kneecap what they've done. They're children, okay? They're innocent, period. But when you are an adult, obviously, you make mistakes. And I think that George in his lifetime would, if he were here to speak today, I think he would agree. Yeah, I've made mistakes. I've done some things. I've done things I'm proud of. And likewise, I've done things that I'm not proud of. But in this situation, it almost feels like he's being blamed, which effectively
Good
he
morning, ma'am.
is.
Could you state and spell your name for the record for us?
Because this is a defense. Basically, what this defense is a self-defense, which means that George did something, right? He's the victim. He's the one who lost his life. But if he hadn't done what he did, then Sarah wouldn't have had to defend herself in the way that she did, which caused George to lose his life. And that's why these type of trials, this type of scenario is difficult, because it is, in essence, really a bit of victim blaming. And that is hard for most of us to hear. All right, here we go.
First name is Janella, Junella. Last name Wadden, UA, D as in Delta, AN.
Thank you, Emily, for being a YouTube member. I appreciate that. Thanks for joining.
Digital
Welcome
Forensics
in,
Examiner.
Midnight Dragonfly. Thank you for being here.
Just an examiner.
Ma'am, Judge, can I approach the witness?
Yes, of course.
Could you turn your microphone on, bruh,
I'm going to show you.
with your index cards or whatever it is you have in your paws?
Exhibit 8A. And you recognize that video or that CD of the video?
Yes.
Well, I think we kind of prepped you on it ahead of time. That was extracted from the Sarah Boone phone that you were asked to extract.
Yes, one of the media files, yes.
Okay, and is that video a fair and accurate depiction of one of the videos that was extracted from Sarah Boone's phone?
Yes.
And then
This is an interesting question. Violet wonders, I wonder if Owens gives out good Halloween candy. No, this is my opinion and my opinion only. I believe that Mr. Owens gives out, that candy that's wrapped in the black and then orange, the two different, color, like wax paper wrapping, that candy. I think that that's the kind of candy he gives out, or pennies. Hi, thank you so much, Emily, for gifting 5 memberships. If you are the lucky recipient of one of those 5 memberships, please thank Emily. That was incredibly sweet and generous of you. Thank you so very much. I don't know what those are called, or those. Yeah, I think he gives out either those or like off-brand candy or pennies or not candy at all, like puzzles or something. Who knows? Here we go.
an identification. See, if that's identification, same type question. You've had a chance to review that video, and is that one of the videos that was extracted from the Sarah Boone phone?
Yes.
Judge, this time I'd like to have these introduced into evidence.
Any objections?
No objection.
All right, what was pre-marked as AA will be received into evidence without objection as defendant 17. What was pre-marked as Z will be received into evidence without objection as defendants 18.
Exhibit 17 first,
You may proceed.
and is there a volume? Judge, do you have control of volume?
Volume is on.
You're gonna help me take this shit out. Real shit. You're gonna help me take it out. You're gonna help me take this shit out. That's how I want to.
Judge, I'm asking to publish Exhibit 18.
You may proceed.
We spoke about it earlier.
Say again, sir.
We spoke about it earlier.
Yes, understood.
They're tendering, no problem.
All right, thank you very much. This witness can't be released, correct?
Yes.
State.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right, can the parties approach momentarily, please? Members of our jury, at this point in time, it's 11:08. I know it's a little bit early, but due to the pacing and how quickly we've been moving through the evidence this morning, and how the defense has teed up their witnesses for this afternoon, we do not have anyone until 1 o'clock. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and take our lunch break at this time. I'm going to give you a similar instruction that I've given you over the last couple of days. Jurors, you must not conduct any investigation on your own. This includes reading newspapers, watching television, or using a computer, cell phone, the internet, any electronic device, or any other means at all to get information related to this case or the people and places involved in this case. This applies whether you are in the an electronic device. You must not use phones, computers, or other electronic devices to communicate. Do not send or accept any messages.
I just want to hear what time we're supposed to return so I know what time to schedule my next live for.
Including posting information on an internet website, chat room, or blog. With that, members of the jury, I'm going to ask you to return here to 12 Alpha at 12:50, and we'll pick up shortly thereafter.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for your service.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor. All right. So I, like the jury and the judge, will be returning to courtroom 12 Alpha at 12:50. But I want to talk a little bit about this video. Let's watch that again, and let's talk about it just a little bit before we go, because so much fuss was made respective to this video that I don't get it. So maybe I missed something. I don't know. Let's see. Let me turn it up.
You're gonna help me take this shit out. Real shit. You're gonna help me take it out. You're gonna help me take this shit out. That's how I want to.
Hold on, I want to catch what he said at the last minute.
You're gonna help me take this shit out.
As bad as I want to. Okay. Here's the thing. I don't understand what that shows. He's not threatening her. Am I missing something? Is it just me? I feel like I don't think this video shows what Sarah or the defense thinks that it shows. There's no yelling. I mean, George definitely has been into the cups, okay? His speech is slurred. But I don't get it. Isn't it, first of all, isn't the TV his in the first place? Isn't that what we decided yesterday? And second of all, it's not like the TV is on, so we don't even know if the TV works. I don't understand this. He's not threatening her with the bat. I don't.
Judge, I'm asking to publish Exhibit 18.
You may proceed.
Okay. Okay, now I understand that breaking things can be part of domestic violence, but this doesn't seem like that's what's going on here, is my point. This doesn't seem like there's a fight, there's an argument, that George is breaking the TV because he's angry with Sarah. In fact, he doesn't even actually, other than being under the influence, he doesn't seem out of control, like he's not in control of his faculties. He's hit that TV, he's not missed once. Nothing else in the apartment is askew, destroyed, out of place. I mean, this TV is sitting right next to, and let me get my low pointer out here. See this? This hasn't even moved. Nothing in the apartment is disheveled. I don't think that it shows in what they're trying to get it to show. It's very clearly him breaking the TV, but I don't think it's in the same context that they're trying to put it in. Does that make sense? And he's keenly aware. See, that I was under the impression, judging from the screenshots that were shown yesterday of the video, that George might not be aware that he's being filmed, but he's clearly aware. He looks and speaks to the camera. I'm not exactly, I'm not saying that, I'm just confused. I'm going to leave it there. That's where I'm at. I don't understand, because there was no, I mean, the witness, obviously, she cannot testify to the content of the video. She can only verify where the video came from, that it was Sarah's phone, what time the video was made, etc. she can't testify to the content. So I'm very, very confused about what this is intended to show, what the point of this was. I don't understand this. I don't know. I don't get it. All right, but that's where we're going to leave it today. I shall be back at 12:45. That way it gives everybody time to get in, get settled, get, what do you mean the subtitle is blocking? I'll share it again, and I'll take off closed captions. And I'll share this again. Give me just a second. What are you trying to see, Notorious Nance? So I want you to be able to see what you're trying to see. And I can help in that way by removing, and let me hide your comment. I can't do anything about the line because I have to pause it. So what are we trying to see here? Well, it's interesting to me because we're not, okay. If you're recording something because you're trying to document domestic violence, this is just my thinking. And it's very difficult to put myself in Sarah's shoes many, many times because I don't understand her thinking. Okay. What is blocked by the TV stand? What are we looking for? I'm confused. Notorious Nance. Let me scroll up and see if I can see. Oh, you wanted to see if it was plugged in. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's hard to tell. Hang on and let me see if I can zoom really quickly and see if maybe we can see something. Hold on a second. I didn't mean to do that. I zoomed in, but now I've gotten it away from the period. So hold on a sec. All right, hold on. Let me present it. And I can't really manipulate this any better. I mean, you can see what the hell. Here we go. You can see the plug right here. It's just hard to tell if it's plugged in. So yeah, I can't call it. All right, let me then back out. Okay, so my point was going to be, if you're trying to record this as an example of domestic violence, an argument, something, it's for documentation purposes, right? Why is it that George only starts speaking when the camera is on? Like when the recording starts, George is not already speaking. He waits and then he speaks. So this doesn't, I'm just very, very, no, Notorious Nance, never apologize. We all wanted to see, is it plugged in? What's the circumstances surrounding this? And now I totes get it. Yeah. Excellent point. Get me a snack. Get me a snack says, I remember Sarah being asked, was the TV working? And she said no. It was when she was asked about her son watching things on the laptop and TV. I mean, that's an excellent point. It doesn't appear that the TV works, and we know. So I don't think that this shows what the defense thinks that it shows. I wish that there was more, they spoke about this more, there was more context around this. It just seems like in this situation, from this video, it doesn't appear that what the recording is some, fight between the two of them that then resulted in George breaking the TV, because there's no yelling and stuff going on. Like the camera goes, the video begins, there's a pause, and then George speaks. So it just doesn't, we need more context. So I don't understand this, and I'm not going to belabor the point because I think you guys all get it. All right, so it's 11:28 now in the East Coast, Florida time. I will see you all back here at 12:45. As soon as I end this, I will schedule the next portion of events of the session. All right, so you guys have a great rest of your morning, and I'll see you back here at 12:45. Thank you guys for being here. If you haven't done so already, give your girl a thumbs up. I appreciate it very, very much. And I'll talk to you all in a little bit. Bye.